Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. It is the 5th of September and actually quite a lot of updates this week. As always, if this is useful, please like, subscribe, comment and share and hit that bell icon to get notified of all my new stuff. New videos this week. So I did post part 4 of the DevOps Masterclass, all about continuous integration, continuous delivery, which can then lead to continuous deployment, with a lot of demos using GitHub Actions. And I then did kind of a video about the new Azure AAD Connect V2. So this big major version of how we replicate our on-premises Active Directory actually to Azure AD. So pretty much every company is leveraging this. On to the new features. So app service plans now have availability zone support. So remember, availability zones are those independent data centers within a region, independent cooling, power, communications. So it gives me better resiliency from some building level failure. So now through an ARM template, I can actually deploy a new, I cannot upgrade an existing, it has to be a new app service plan where I'm basically saying, hey, I want zone redundant to be true. I have to have at least 3 instances so it can distribute across the 3 AZs that I see in my subscription. And now I have this AZ resilient app service plan. It has to be a premium V2 or premium V3 plan. And if you have an existing plan in a region, in a resource group, I'm going to need to create a new resource group in that region when I go and create the new plan, just because of the way some things on the back end work. There's a whole bunch of new Azure Batch capabilities. So they added the ability to have managed identities for the pool. Remember, Azure Batch is all about that high performance computing, those big, large scale parallel executions. Well, now I can have those jobs running within there, I can leverage that managed identity. It made it easier to add VM extensions at a pool level, AZ support, just like kind of the app service plans. I can use ephemeral OS disks, so I don't have to have a managed disk. I can use the temporary storage of the host that runs the VM. There were some new VM sizes that I can dump out using AZ CLI PowerShell, just a whole bunch of nice batch features. The Azure VMware solution now has a run command. So if we think about, okay, we have those vSphere based private clouds. So what I can now do is actually through the Azure portal, when I go and look at the Azure VMware Solution Blade, what it's going to now expose to me are a list of packages kind of built on top of PowerShell that I can now execute through the portal instead of having to go to vSphere directly. Now today it's limited, I think, to just 3 sets of functionality. I can view and edit storage policies, I can configure an external identity source, and I can install or uninstall the Jetstream DR solution. That's a third-party continuous replication solution. But that list of things is going to grow in the future that I'll be able to manage through this run command of the actual Azure portal. There were a bunch of Azure Function retirements. Node 6 and Node 10 are getting retired. Node 6 is the 28th of February 2022. Node 10 is the 30th of September 2022. Basically, go and move to Node 14. And PowerShell 6 is getting retired the 30th of September 22. Go and move to PowerShell 7. And then AKS now has this ability to have custom policy. So now I can actually create these custom policy definitions, constraint templates for my AKS clusters, so I can define my own. There's also a bunch of other changes happening. For example, AKS now has these policy error states. So if I had non-compliance, I get kind of reason codes. If I had conflicts between multiple policies that were conflicting with each other, I would actually get kind of conflict messages. There's a new VS Code extension to make it easy to audit those Azure custom policies. A whole bunch of just nice features all around that. On the networking side, so for ExpressRoute, there are new peering locations. So remember, these are just regular peering locations where I can connect my network to the Microsoft backbone. So these are Chicago 2, Poon and Sol to. And then they added new ExpressRoute Direct locations. Remember, ExpressRoute Direct is different from regular ExpressRoute. Regular ExpressRoute, I'm going through a provider. They have their routers, and then they connect into Microsoft Enterprise Edge routers. With ExpressRoute Direct, there is kind of no middle person. I'm basically connecting my routers to that Microsoft Enterprise Edge. And you get two connections across two routers, so I have resiliency, it's active. But I'm basically connecting directly from my routers into the Microsoft Enterprise Edge. With that, I can do things like MACsec, so I can do encryption between those routers so the traffic is encrypted wherever that location is where we've got our routers actually sitting. So now Denver, Newport, Wales, and again Pune now support these new ExpressRoute Direct locations. Both for them, all of them, 10 gigabit per second and 100 gigabit per second direct ports are supported. Route Server goes GA. So I did a whole video about Route Server, so go and check that out. But it's basically the ability to have this service running in my virtual network that things like network virtual appliances can establish a BGP relationship to, and then both learn routes about the VNet and what the VNet is connected to, and push routes. For example, if I had an NVA connected to another network, in the past I'd have to use user-defined routes to say, hey, if I'm trying to get to this location, this is the NVA you have to go to. With Route Server, those NVAs can establish a resilient BGP session to the Route Server, which will populate the address spaces it gets to the VNet, connected networks, so I don't have to manually create those UDRs. And it opens up a lot of other really cool, nice scenarios as well. Private Link now has Network Security Group and UDR in preview. So remember, the whole point of Private Link is all about, hey, look, I have my virtual network and I have a certain subnet. And maybe it's a Microsoft kind of PaaS service. Maybe it's a specific storage account, say storage account 1. Well, it can get an IP address within that subnet that actually just responds into that particular instance of a storage account. Or it could be SQL or Postgres, all these different services. Or maybe it's a service in another subscription that's actually sitting behind an internal load balancer that's using a private link service, and it has got a private endpoint. So again, it's a way, and again, it's natting the traffic when I'm kind of doing these things, that then goes and talks to some bunch of resources. So I could publish a service to another network. In the past, any kind of network security group or UDR, user-defined route, was ignored. It would not be used on this path. Well, now what I can actually do is I can turn a switch on. So I have to enable private endpoint network policies. It's a property on the subnet. So I enable kind of the policies using that setting. And now, hey, if I have a network security group that's maybe controlling the traffic that can flow to the private endpoint, I can control that. If I have a user-defined route applied to the subnet or something else, that, hey, to get to this private endpoint, your next hop is maybe a virtual appliance, it will now honor that. So I can leverage both NSGs and UDRs now with my private endpoints. So that is a super nice capability. In preview, you have to go and enable it, then go and enable the subnet for the network policies, but then I can go and use those features. Okay, storage. On the managed disk side, it now has automatic customer managed key rotation. So if I use my own keys in my key vault, now when I go and create a new version of that key, I don't have to do anything else. The managed disk will just see, hey, there's a new version of the key and just start using it. There's nothing I have to do. Additionally, for premium SSD managed disks, I can now change the performance tier dynamically, so that there's no downtime. So remember, the whole point of this is ordinarily when I think about a disk, you have the idea that, hey, I have some disk, and what typically happens is as the capacity goes up, so too does things like throughput and IOPS. Well, maybe I need a higher performance, maybe for 12 hours or 24 hours or a couple of days. But I don't want to resize the disk, because yes, I could resize the disk from here to here, and then I'd get the new throughput and the higher IOPS, but you can't shrink a disk. So what the performance lets me do is, hey, I can keep this capacity, but I can actually go and use the throughput as if it was the bigger disk. Now, obviously, I pay for the bigger disk. I pay for that amount, but I'm not resizing it. Well, I can actually go and do that dynamically. So if we go and look super fast, if I was to just go and kind of search for my disks, and if I just pick a disk, I don't know, just any data disk will do, pick that one. So you can see that's a premium SSD here. So if I just pick that disk, you can actually see I've got size and performance. And you can see, hey, based on the size, it has a certain amount of kind of provisioned IOPS, provisioned throughput. So it has these numbers. But what I can actually do is, if you look, I can select a different performance tier, one that's higher. So I could actually now just change that to a higher tier, and I'd get that better performance. So I can do those things now without impacting anything else. And you can downgrade it every 12 hours. So it's not like I can constantly do this every minute, but I can actually go and do those things and now get that dynamic capability. So those performance tiers, very, very useful if I need something beyond the burst. You get a certain bucket of burst capability for free, but maybe I need something beyond that, or it's a disk that doesn't have a burst bucket. I can go and change that on a more steady level. On the database side, so PostgreSQL database flexible servers, that's one's built, remember, on virtual machines. I can use burstable VMs, I have high availability options, a whole bunch of different things. I can stop and start it. Now has intelligent tuning. So intelligent tuning is really based around kind of the frequency and duration of the various checkpoints it leverages for synchronizations. But as the name suggests, it's just going to automatically do that based on what it's actually seeing. Hyperscale now has support for Germany West Central, and it has 11.12 minor version support. So that's the hyperscale, i.e. the fragmenting the data out over multiple instances, kind of infinite scale, infinite capacity. Azure SQL had some updates. So in preview, I can now set the differential backup frequency. And in GA, if I have SQL managed instance, what will now happen if I delete all of the kind of instances, it will delete the virtual cluster as well for me automatically. In the past, it could kind of get left behind. Well, now it will automatically get cleaned up. There's a new Azure SQL Migration extension. Let's just show this. So what this essentially is going to do, it's got some nice little screenshots, is now actually within Azure Data Studio, if I add this Azure SQL Migration extension, so I go and install it, actually now from the Data Studio, I get this really nice kind of migration experience just native in it. So I can be moving from my SQL Server databases to SQL Server in Azure VMs or SQL Managed Instance, so in PAS, and it just kind of guides me through that, all within kind of that extension. So just a nicer experience. Miscellaneous, so Azure AAD Connect v2 is GA. Again, I did the deep dive video where I kind of walked through, check that out. Windows Server 2022 is GA, so that's now a long-term servicing channel. They kind of announced they're not going to be doing kind of those semi-annual 6-monthly channels anymore. But there is standard data center and data center Azure edition. Remember, the Azure edition has a lot of like hot patching and capabilities we can leverage in Azure. It's available in the Azure Marketplace right now. A bunch of new features around sort of hardware-based multi-layered security, better features around containers, better integration with Azure Arc, TLS 1.3, a whole bunch of nice clustering things about affinity, anti-affinity, automatic cluster sites based on Active Directory sites, better repair for storage spaces direct, SMB direct encryption, just a whole bunch of great stuff. Windows 11 has been announced it will be rolling out in a month's time. So 5th of October, I'm going to be hitting that refresh and go and get Windows 11. There's now a simplified VMware DR experience with Azure Site Recovery. Now this really boils down to the fact that in the past you had to go and manually upgrade certain things. So now what's going to happen is the ASR replication appliance and the mobility agent will now just automatically update when there's a new version. There's nothing else I have to go and do. It doesn't need root admin credentials anymore. And there's better scale. It's going to use some microservices actually in Azure to help the scalability. And if your appliance fails, hey, I can actually now just go in with a new appliance, say switch over to a new appliance without having to go and redo all the replication. So a bunch of improvements around there. Azure Security Center had a whole bunch of updates. So if we go and look at the Azure Security Center update, so for August 2021, talks about Microsoft Defender for Endpoint for Linux is now supported by Azure Defender for Servers. New recommendations about actually managing endpoint protection. So hey, it should be installed on your machines. Health issues should be resolved. Some new built-in troubleshooting. So we go to kind of the diagnose and solve problems. There's a bunch of new capabilities built in around here to go and help me with various issues I might be facing. Easier access to the various Azure audit reports under Regulatory Compliance in Security Center. You can see it's kind of breaking all those down. Deprecating some recommendations around kind of log analytics agents. Basically, it can mess up some of the secure scores. Azure Defender for Container Registries now scans those protected with private links. So that's a nice thing. So if I had a container registry that was using private links, so it wasn't accessible via the internet, I couldn't scan it with Azure Defender before. Well, now I can. So you can go and use that Qualys engine to go and pull it down if it's used kind of every 30 days and make sure there's no kind of vulnerabilities in that. Auto provisioning of the Azure Policy Guest configuration extension, which I talked about last week, but now using things like Chef Inspect, PowerShell DSC, we can actually apply in-guest policies. Recommendations to enable Azure Defender, CSV exports 20 megabytes, multiple views of recommendations, so just a lot of different things added in Security Center. Azure Backup can now actually seed using Azure Data Box or Azure Data Box Disk. Remember, Azure Data Box is this kind of big appliance. It gets shipped to me, and I think it's 100 terabytes, and I think it's maybe 80 or 70 terabytes is usable amount of space. And what I can now do is essentially copy my backup. So when I go through the backup, I can back up to the data box or data box disk, ship those to the data center. They will bring that in to my vault, and that's seeding that initial backup. So if I have so much data, it's just not practical for me to maybe copy over the network. I have a low network connection or something, or just not enough spare bandwidth. I can now seed it to do that initial population using those kind of offline data box solutions. Azure AAD Graph is being retired. And again, I did a deep dive about the Microsoft Graph a few weeks ago. So basically before 30th of June 2022, go and switch over your apps to use the Microsoft Graph. Carrying on, Azure Monitor, now cross-service queries has gone GA. So as the name suggests, so from Azure Monitor to Azure Data Explorer, I can do queries across those things. Now has AZ support. Now that AZ support is where I have a dedicated cluster. So it's where, hey, I have this dedicated cluster because I have a certain volume of transactions. You get features like customer managed keys, lockbox to control engineer access. I can do double encryption. I get better performance across workspace queries that are on the same sort of cluster. Well, now I can have that resilient across availability zones as well. App configuration, which is that central service I can use to store application configurations that I can then use by my apps, now supports 30,000 requests per hour. That is up from 20,000 requests an hour. Azure Cost Management has a bunch of updates. Everyone is updating stuff. Oh, contact and server. So on the cost management side, and this is really based around, hey, it's a new download option in the cost analysis preview. So they've kind of got these download capabilities to Excel, CSV, and they can open in Power BI if you've got an EA. So we can see these open in Power BI options over there. Some more configurations available. And then just really looking for feedback, things like that. So that's those there. And then, yet another one, Azure Virtual Desktop, they released a bunch of updates. So one of the nice ones is the screen capture protection went GA. So if I try and capture the screen from my client, it's going to kind of block that out. But they also added things like multimedia redirection in preview. So if I'm watching a video, what it will now do is actually send the bit stream for that to my local device for the rendering, rather than rendering it up in Azure and then sending kind of the pixel update. So I'm actually going to get a much better experience. But there were other things as well they kind of released. If I actually get this to open, come on, open, there we go. So we can see here, hey, the Windows 11 preview, which we talked about previously, multimedia redirection in preview, IP virtualization for Windows Server 2019. IP virtualization is where if I have multiple users on one server, each session actually gets its own IP address on that server. That can be super useful if I have, hey, I'm talking to some service, but it only allows one connection per client. So normally if I had 20 people on one session host, they've all got the same IP, it would fail. So with IP virtualization, each session gets its own IP address for their session, so that service I'm connecting to would see a unique IP. So that IP virtualization is a really useful thing. Talks about Windows Defender application control and disk encryption supported, smart cards, and just that screen capture protection. So just a bunch of nice things. Keep going into the Azure Virtual Desktop solution. And that was it. So a lot of stuff, a lot of really cool, great updates. As always, I hope that was useful. Keep you informed. And until next time, take care.